I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
В Совете Безопасности прав.
In the exercising the right to the veto, we warned the sponsors that such situations, far from always, imply principled disagreements amongst members of the Security Council. Rather frequently, the negative vote of a permanent member of the Security Council is nothing more than the consequence of a tactical struggle in the Council and the desire to portray the opponent in a negative light. Today, we have gathered here today in order to discuss this specific situation. On 8 July, the UN Security Council, the Russian Federation, voted against a draft resolution on the extension of the cross-border mechanism in Syria as presented by Ireland and Norway. Subsequent to this, the United States, United Kingdom, and France voted against our draft on the same topic. The reason for the disagreements which prevented the Security Council from adopting either of the drafts that day, the reason was related to a single point: the scheme whereby the provision of cross-border assistance, humanitarian assistance to Syria after 6 months could be extended for another 6 months. We insisted that to that end, there would be a need for another separate Security Council resolution. Western countries tried to secure an extension immediately for a period of 1 year. At the same time, neither the Russian Federation nor they disagreed that the scheme for the provision of humanitarian assistance to Syria on the whole requires fine-tuning. And this is because the Resolution 2585, which was unanimously adopted by the Security Council 1 year ago, was not duly implemented. Our analysis reflects the fact that this largely occurred, indeed, due to the fact that this resolution did not contain a clear mechanism for non-extension after a half year of implementation for another half year if Security Council membership deems progress to have been insufficient. For this reason, the measures set out in Resolution 2585 essentially began to be implemented by May to June of 2022. That is directly just before the expiration of it. And this all was done for a single goal: an attempt to placate Syria and the Russian Federation before another extension. Distinguished colleagues, the sly nature of our former Western colleagues lies specifically in the fact that the refusal to consider the 6-month extension of the cross-border mechanism, 6 plus 6, as is known, is 12, that in so doing, they de facto determined that any measures to fine-tune the humanitarian assistance system to Syria is something which they had no intention of doing. And this is a situation which neither the Syrians nor we could tolerate. Why is the provision of the cross-border mechanism system wrong, and why can it not be left unchanged? Where are its shortcomings? This mechanism for humanitarian assistance to Syria from the territory of neighboring states was launched pursuant to Security Council resolution in 2014, when the country, being ripped apart by terrorists, was not in a position to independently provide assistance to all people in need. In this way, the cross-border mechanism initially was designed exclusively as an emergency temporary measure to provide support for people who fell hostage to areas ravaged by a terrorist presence. Counterterrorism successes of Damascus were achieved with the support of the Russian armed forces, and since then they have fundamentally changed the situation on the ground. The only areas not under Syrian government control only remain areas beyond the Euphrates, where the U.S. occupants every day loot the hydrocarbon and grain resources, and the Idlib de-escalation zone in the northwest of the country, which is occupied by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an internationally recognized terrorist organization. And in this specific part of the country, assistance continues to provide through the sole existing crossing point, the Bab al-Hawa point. The other three checkpoints, crossing points, pursuant to Security Council resolution, were shuttered 2 years ago. And this, among other things, finally allowed for a mutually acceptable scheme to be established for the unfettered provision of humanitarian cargo to northeast Syria from areas under the control of the legitimate government of that country. It is important here to note that Syria, from the very beginning, viewed this cross-border mechanism as illegitimate, and Syria insisted that it be shattered ultimately. And Damascus is absolutely right here. This mechanism violates the core principle for the provision of humanitarian assistance as is set out in General Assembly Resolution 46/182, namely the consent of the host state and its key role in the coordination of humanitarian assistance deliveries on its soil. This principle is complied with everywhere except Syria. And if 8 or even 5 years ago, without the cross-border mechanism, this situation would not have been improved, today, however, nothing is preventing Syrian sovereignty from being respected in this matter. Nothing. Other than the unwillingness of Western countries to stop supporting international terrorists who they trained and equipped to oust the legitimate Syrian authorities. It is only the neo-colonialist mindsets and their resentment at their plans having failed. This alone is torpedoing the process of the restoration of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And this, despite the fact that they formally declare commitment to Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity, including Security Council resolutions. Distinguished colleagues, I will not delve into the details of our assessments of the cross-border mechanism. We regularly set them out during the monthly open briefings of the Security Council, and you can all easily familiarize yourselves with them. I will merely state that we are convinced of the need to ensure that provisions across cross-line mechanisms for them to replace the cross-border deliveries of humanitarian assistance. We understand that this is difficult to achieve quickly for a multitude of reasons, and for this reason, we consented to the 6+6 formula. Is this possible? Of course it's possible. We all have before us the example of how deliveries across the Yarobia point in East Syria, which was shuttered at our insistence for the same reasons, were quite quickly reoriented to reflect the cross-line system. And yet the hypocritical lamentations of this being impossible and of this causing the suffering of women and children, the lamentations from Western countries, were abounded nonetheless, and they clearly were wrong. You will once again hear these lamentations today, most likely with allegations that Russia wishes to deprive people of basic necessities and wishes to cause those same women and children to freeze in 6 months. You know that this is not correct. We will not object to the extension of the cross-border mechanism for another 6 months, but only on the condition of Security Council members complying with what we agreed upon 1 year ago when we unanimously adopted Resolution 2585. The resolution not only talks about cross-line deliveries, but also about early recovery projects. And the resolution also talks about the need to ensure far greater transparency for the cross-border mechanism. This is part of the path that needs to be undertaken by the UN Secretary General and his subordinates. There are also significant shortcomings here which allow international terrorists to continue to benefit from humanitarian assistance deliveries. And this is something that needs to end. distinguished colleagues, assessing what transpired on 8 July, I would urge you to focus not so much on our views, but more on the views of the permanent representative of Syria. For each and every one of you could find yourselves in the place of Syria. For this not to happen, there is a need to help our former Western partners recognize that the majority of the members of the international community do not recognize their right to govern the world, its resources, and the potential for the advancement of their parochial agendas, for the implementation of their implementation of geopolitical projects, the ousting of inconvenient governments, and their shameless looting of countries, peoples, and entire continents. By exercising our veto on 8 July, the Russian Federation once again protected the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. And who will protect you if you allow yourselves to be dragged into others' games? Who will shield you from transforming into yet another Ukraine, which became a mere pawn in the West's geopolitical chess game against the Russian Federation, and claimed the lives of its citizens for the advancement of the interests of the U.S. and their NATO allies? Think about this. I'm confident that today there will be a lot of lies bandied about the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. To conclude, I would ask you to carry out a simple experiment. Place on your left the text of our draft resolution, which on 8 July, the United States, United Kingdom, and French voted against. And on the right, the text of Resolution 2642, which was adopted by the Security Council on 12 July and positively accepted and welcomed by the humanitarian community and the majority of our Security Council colleagues. London, Washington, and Paris have long had an allergy to anything Russian and any Russian initiatives at the United Nations before our cultural heritage. And consider these two texts and try to find any differences, and you will not. And this only means one thing. On 8 July, our former Western partners had a resolution that was acceptable to all the membership of the Security Council. However, due to political considerations, instead of adopting the resolution, they preferred to provoke our veto. Is this how a conscientious member of the international community conducts themselves? Of course not. For this reason, we, in consideration of the reform of the Security Council, advocate not for expansion of the Western camp. There are more than enough representatives of that camp, but we support states of Asia, Latin America, and first and foremost Africa, against whom a historic error was made. And we hope that the majority of those in this hall support this position. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.